Well, we're kicking off a brand new series today called The Great Mystery. Starting it off by showing you images of snow, which we'll never get to see here in Alabama, was probably not the best idea. I know, maybe feeling a little sad. But there's something about the images in this that just strike up in me some excitement. Striking out into solving something new, starting a new journey. I think there's something significant in our human condition where we love to solve this word, mystery. We love this. We love mystery. I don't know how many of y'all were Scooby-Doo fans when you were kids. I've been told that Five Nights at Freddy is Scooby-Doo 2.0 for some of you college students and high school students. I don't know, maybe that's the case or not. But we love unraveling things, right? And figuring out what happens and how did it happen and figuring out all the details. Mystery is a really amazing thing to us. And I don't know if you know this, okay, nerd out moment for me. Your brain is actually wired to be excited by mystery. Because you're a rational being, and your brain loves to solve puzzles and loves to figure out things logically and loves to unravel the mysteries that you find in your life. In fact, Albert Einstein once said, go ahead and fill that up there for me. Here it goes. There it is. The most beautiful thing we can experience is the mysterious. The most beautiful thing in the world we can experience is the mysterious. And I think that's so true. I think it's so true for us that finding something that we've never done before, being a part of something and unraveling it and figuring out all the pieces of it excites us. Carl Sagan said it just a little bit differently. He said this: somewhere, something incredible is waiting to be known. And I don't know if you've ever taken any personality tests. If you haven't figured this out by me, I'm going to lay it all on the table. You're going to know way too much about me already. But I always land in that pioneer category. In any of those personality tests that I take, I'm always love to do things never been done. Oregon Trail was my jam in the 90s when we were in elementary school, IBM computers and all the things. I just loved it. Doing something never been done, going someplace never been gone before, experiencing things. It's probably why I'm a Star Trek fan too. Again, too much nerd for you today. And just in case, for all of my fellow nerds that are in the room, one more quote to kind of draw you into this idea. Tolkien once said this in a book called The Fellowship of the Ring. He said, "It is a dangerous business, Frodo, going out your door. You step onto the road, and if you don't keep your feet, there's no knowing where you might be swept off to." It's a beautiful thing to solve, to discover, to experience the new. Now, the quest for meaning and purpose is universal to the human condition. So whether you're a religious person or not, maybe you came in this room today because somebody said, "Hey, come to church with me and I'll buy you lunch after," or maybe you just wandered in here because people go to church on Christmas, and I get that. Maybe you're here because your wife made you, okay? Maybe you're here because your husband made you. I don't know. I get that, okay? I want to just own the fact that there's a lot of people in the room in that same condition. This is not just a Christian thing, though. This is a universal human condition. This quest for meaning and purpose is universal. You want to know who you are. And you've been asking that question for a really long time. You want to know why you're here. And you've been asking that question for a really long time. Now, if you're a Jesus follower, you've found the centerpiece of how life really works. But if you're not, you're still wrestling. Now, regardless of what experience you had, how much church experience you've had, sooner or later, every human being has to answer, if they're wrestling with questions about purpose and meaning, sooner or later, everybody comes to the topic of God. Right? Sooner or later. And maybe you've already concluded exactly what you think you know about God. Maybe you've already drawn all the conclusions. You know exactly what everything is and how everything works, and you've got a box created neatly that you've put God in and say, this is the answer. I want to challenge that a little bit, because I don't think that that's how it works at all. But just for a minute, let me just point to someone else who thought the exact same thing. Last quote of the sermon, I promise. G.K. Chesterton said, "The riddles of God are more satisfying than any of the solutions that man can come up with." Right? The riddles of God, the way that God seems to express himself, the way that God seems to be known to humanity, it's more satisfying to look at the way he talks about himself than the way we could come up with solutions on our own. Now, regardless, again, one more thing. Regardless of where you're at, sooner or later, every human being has to ask this question: who is God? Maybe you've already asked it. Maybe you're still wrestling with it. But we all ask this. Atheists ask this question. Agnostics ask this question before they determine who they're going to be or what they've decided how the world works. Everybody asks this question sooner or later. In fact, we ask this question, and some of us look at the exact same evidence and come up with two different answers. Not long ago, I was in the parking lot here at our church, and I dropped my kids off for a function, and we were in line, and there was a kind of a catastrophe happening, and I'd made a joke about being the pastor here, right? But it's not my job, so outside group, not my circus, not my monkeys. I was just dropping my kids off, and so I went back across, and I didn't realize there was a guy behind me who had made the decision that he was an atheist. He didn't believe in God, and so he wasn't like chasing me, but like I went to go get in my car, and he came right beside me. And he goes, so, hey, you're the pastor, right? And I said, yeah, I'm the pastor. He goes, how do you reconcile the theodicy with a loving God? Now, if you don't know what that word means, don't worry about it. When I heard that, it piqued my mind to go, this guy's had some sort of training before, or he's watched one too many YouTube videos before, and he's drawn some conclusions. And so rather than launching into a theological debate with this guy who clearly had, an answer in his mind already, I just stepped back and said, well, I don't know, but I'm sure there's a story there. And we began to discuss, and I discovered that he'd been to seminary like me. In fact, he'd been in ministry like me, and he'd been around the world and done things that I probably never will have the opportunity to do. But somewhere along the way, he'd become disillusioned. Somewhere along the way, he read something, interpreted something, experienced something, and it just broke his view of God. And maybe you're there. Maybe you didn't go to seminary, but maybe you're there. Your view of God has been broken by something you've experienced or something that's happened to you. And so I want to own the fact, the reality as we start this new series that we can look at the same evidence, we can look at the same things, and we can draw two different conclusions. But there is a way to answer this question. There is a way to answer this question. And the challenge I want to put before you for the next 4 weeks is to just consider maybe we've been trying to answer it the wrong way. Who is God? Arguably the greatest mystery in the world. The greatest mystery. Now the problem is, a lot of times we end up pulling, you get pieces here, pieces there, some evidence of our own. We grab things we think, from our own experience. We read 3 or 4 scriptures, it's a little bit dabble from the Old Testament, a little bit from the New Testament. We cobble it together when we answer this question, and sooner or later we end up with a God who kind of looks like us. We end up with a God who looks kind of like us because we've pulled a Jurassic Park and we've filled in the gaps, right? We've just taken some stuff and shoved it in there and put it all together, and we end up with a God like us. And a God like us can't save us. A God like us is like us. So there's got to be something more, right? And I think that's why so many of us, when we get this view of this great, mysterious, and all-powerful God, and we bring him down into a box that we think we understand, we kind of like mute him. We remove some power. We remove some wonder. We make him as understandable as we can make him, and yet at the same time we make him feel like he has no relevance. So I ask you again, can we know God? I think yes. But the only way to know God is to look at what he says about himself. What is it that God has said about himself? And so just for a few moments, I want to invite you to do something kind of crazy, especially if you've been in church for a real long time. I just want you to step back for a second. I want you to try to take the lenses by which you look at God off. I want you to try to take off your experience. I want you to try to take off your training. I want you to try to take off everything that you think you know about God for a moment, and allow him to be mysterious and wonder-filled and awesome, and allow him to speak about himself for just a moment to you. Because the answer to can we know God is way better coming from him than it is coming from us. So I want to read a scripture to you. It's more of a story to begin our time together. And over the next several weeks, we're going to examine this story along with a few others that happen after. And then we're going to go to the end of the story and work backwards and meet in the middle. Because God has been revealing himself to us for a really long time. And sometimes we listen and sometimes we don't. But this was really the beginning of his opportunity to begin showing who he is to us. And it begins in the book of Exodus in chapter 3. I'm an Old Testament nerd. If you haven't figured that out yet, if you stand around long enough, you'll figure that out. I promise there'll be a gospel reading by the end of the sermon today. But in Exodus chapter 3, there's this encounter that happens with Moses and God, and it's a burning bush story if you've heard this in Sunday school class before. But don't let your Sunday school lens wash over this story. I don't want to talk about the burning bush today. I want to talk about what God says about himself. So if you don't know the story, just a little bit of setting the scene. Moses has been in Egypt with all of the rest of the Hebrews. He had been miraculously saved from just a genocide that had happened. He'd been raised in the palace Really cool story. Sooner or later, he figures out who he is. He understands what his story is. He finds himself defending some of his own people from the Egyptian guards. He gets freaked out. He actually murders one of the guards. Yes, one of the heroes of the Bible is a murderer. And he flees town. Ends up in this little valley called Midian, and he gets married, and he's tending sheep. He goes from designing and living in the palace and having all this power to tending sheep. And he's out tending the flock one day, and this encounter happens. Check this out, Exodus chapter 3, verse 1. Now, Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb. Horeb is another name for Mount Sinai. It's two different ways to talk about the moon and the sun. You don't really care, but it's the same place as like Ten Commandments and all this stuff. Okay, so picture that scene in your mind. This is Moses' first time there. He came to the mountain of God. The story continues. Then, there the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Now, Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. That's a pretty curious thing. So, Moses thought, I will go over and see the strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. This part of the story you probably know before. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from the bush, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, Here I am. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for this place where you are standing is holy ground. As you get this picture of entering into something that's never been entered in before, right? And I always imagine, it doesn't say this, okay, I'm reading in a little bit, but like the ground is trembling a little bit. And there's this bush, and something crazy is happening, something beyond nature, something beyond a normal, rational brain to be able to understand. And from the midst of this crazy, miraculous thing, the voice of God speaks to Moses about himself. He goes, hey, it's holy here. Take your shoes off. You're entering into something new, something other, something mysterious. The story continues like this. Then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And at this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. He'd heard the stories. You know, he'd been taught that when he was a kid. And he realized he was in the presence of God, and it kind of freaked him out a little bit. I think it would me too. I think it would you too. As you're grappling with who God is, and he's probably asking these questions while he's tending sheep. And then he comes face to face in this strange, odd way with the God he'd been hearing about his entire life. The story continues like this. Moses said to God, suppose I go to Israel. Okay, well, let me back up for a second. I got ahead of myself. So they had this long conversation. And Moses asked God, why are you talking to me, right? And then God responds to Moses and says, hey, guess what? I have decided, I've heard my people's cry, and I have decided that you are going to go back to Egypt and free them from slavery. You're going to be the hero. You're going to go get them and draw them out. And Moses is trying to come up with every excuse he possibly can to not be that guy because it's a massive call. He doesn't want to go back to Egypt. He's a wanted man, lots of different stuff. And so, you know, he's tried to have a stutter thing, it didn't work. He's tried to, what do I do next? It didn't work. And finally he goes, hey, suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, hey, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? Then what shall I tell them? In other words, okay, if I even say to go, if I just go and say, hey, Daddy's God said it's time for you to come with me, they're going to think that's a little weird. So what do I say? Who do I say has called me? Now, I have to go deep for just a minute, okay? I have to tell you something really profound that's happened in this statement. And I need you to take a deep breath because it's going to be just like 45 seconds of Hebrew, all right? And I didn't like an entire semester of it. I don't want to do 45 seconds, but if you can get this, I promise, there's a huge payoff for your understanding of God on the other side of what I'm about to say, okay? Deep breath. Everybody ready? Okay, here we go. So, back up for me. He says, what is his name? Now, when we say that in English, that's just one way to say it. But the odd thing is, if you were in Hebrew and you were reading this 1,500 years ago, your ears would perk up because this phrase, this is what he says. Go to this next phrase. He goes, what is his name? And the phrase that he says is Ma Shemo, okay? Everybody say that out loud just so you sound goofy with me. 1, 2, 3. Ma Shemo. That's what he says. Now, this is a really strange way to ask, what is your name? This is not the normal way to ask. And if you were reading this in the original language, you're like, that's kind of strange. Why would he say that? Because if you were going to say, hey, what's your name? What do you would say, Mi Shimka. This is what you would say. Now see this one with me. 1, 2, 3, Mi Shimka. See now, that was worth the price of admission right there. You learned 2 Hebrew phrases in like 45 seconds. Look at you go. Now here's what's weird. This isn't what Moses said. This means, what is your name? Or what do I call you, right? Or who is your name? Because the Hebrew language is kind of guttural and it's kind of confusing, okay? But in Exodus 3:14, he says, Ma Shemo. what does Ma Shemo mean? It means, what is the meaning of your name? Or in other words, what is it that makes you, you? What makes you, you? Who are you? And basically, tell me your character. Help me understand this God. I don't want to just know your name. I'm not looking for your name being Bob or Bill or Laser or whatever else. I want to know what your name is. I want to know who you are. I want to know about your character. How do I go back and tell these people about this God? Tell me something about you that I can take back with me to them. Again, let's put it all back together. Moses said, suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask, what is his name? Then what shall I tell them? And this is beautiful. This is what God says in reply. God said to Moses, I am who I am. This is what you're to say to the Israelites. I am has sent you to me. Now this phrase, even if you can grow up in church, the I am who I am is a phrase that you've heard before. But another way to translate it from the original language is that God said, what I am, I always will be. Which is not exactly answering Moses' question. We got to fast forward a little bit later, and then later in the series, I hope you feel what his answer is. But this is huge. Do you understand what God is saying? Whatever I am, I will always be. If I am compassionate, I will always be compassionate. If I am holy, I will always be holy. If I am kind, I will always be kind. If I am loving, I will always be loving. If I make a promise, I will always keep my promise. God is saying, whatever I am doesn't change. Now, I don't know about you, but I've had plenty of life experience, things that have happened where I have these great encounters where I realize God is just so close and God is just so near. And then I've had same kind of things happen in different times and different circumstances and realize that, God, where are you? And sometimes, without an understanding of this, we might get this picture that it's circumstance, it's happenstance, it's luck. But God made a promise, the very first thing that he began revealing about himself. He could have started anywhere. He could have started anywhere. He could have started right here and said, a couple thousand years from now, I'm going to send my son Jesus. He's going to die, and it's going to be this great covenant. God deliberately chose to trickle out some information about himself, and he started with, whatever I am, I always will be. And so I want to ask you a question. Did you know that God is steadfast? Did you know that of all the mysterious things that we can know about God, of all the things that we can come to realize about what God is doing in the world or how he feels about you, that he's unchanging, that he's unwavering? Another way to put this is, did you know God will never give up on you? Did you know that no matter what you've experienced, on the other side of the circumstance you find yourself in is a God who has not given up on you because he said so? The Christmas time hits all of us a little differently. There's some of us who have experienced loss this year, great loss. People in this very room have experienced things that if I'd experienced what you'd experienced, I'd be feeling just as broken and frustrated as you are. And so I find great comfort in the reality that of all the things God could have said about himself first, he said, I am who I am. Now, this is where we get Yahweh, and I'll explain all that later. That's a different sermon for a different time. But God wanted Moses, who he was asking to do great things, to know from the start, the I am, who always is and always will be, is going with you. And he went as far to say this is how he finishes it up. This is my name forever. This is my name forever. The name you shall call me from generation to generation. This is who I am. And this is who I always will be. Now again, let me just point out the fact that Moses said, Ma Shemo, right? What is it that makes you you? He asked this question, and God didn't quite answer that question. But a really crazy thing happens. I told you I was going to the gospel. This is where we're going to end. A really crazy thing happens at the very end of Jesus' life. He's praying in the garden. He knows that his time has come, and in fact, just moments from the moment he finishes this prayer, guards, soldiers, a betrayer are going to come into the garden. They're going to chain him up. They're going to drag him out and take him to the cross. He's about to die. And he knows that. And as he's praying his last prayer, this is the one that has in there somewhere along the lines of, if this cup could pass from me, let it, nevertheless not my will but yours, where he's talking about he's feeling the weight of his own death. And he says this. Have you ever caught this before? I, speaking to God, have revealed your name to those whom you gave me out of this world. They were yours, you gave them to me, and they have obeyed your word. I have revealed your name to them. Wow. And we think about this revelation that is Jesus in this Christmas season, and there's babies and mangers and wise men and all the things, and it's super cool, and we all love Christmas trees and lights, but at the center of this, God was up to something and revealing himself to all of humanity. And it's the same God who spoke to Moses in a burning bush saying, everything that I am, I always will be. And Jesus, here at the end of his life, is saying, I have fully revealed your name to them. Can you know God? Can you know God? Yes. But only what he says about himself. And he has said a lot. And we're going to pick it up right there with part 2 next week of the Great Mystery right here at TCAT at 10 a.m. Let me pray for you. Heavenly Father, I want to thank you so much for these words, God, this way in which you've chosen to reveal yourself to us through the generations, this way in which you've chosen to trickle out your name, to be present for each of us, to be steadfast for each of us, and to show us without a shadow of a doubt who you are. God, help us to set aside our preconceived notions about you and just let you be. Understand who you are for us and allow that to shape how we see you. We ask all this in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you all so much for coming to TCAT. God bless you. We'll see you next week for part 2. Okay, bring somebody with you. Take care.